Tony, and welcome back to Smelgin 2030. I'm a big guy because I do push-ups and have an endless supply of black t-shirts. I don't think that elected officials should ignore the less fortunate, and I don't let anyone I interview pay for what I eat at restaurants. What do you say about that, Emperor?
I'm a big liberal who's never defrauded anyone and thinks that common sense and decency should be requirements for public office, especially at local levels. I think that citizens are smart and shouldn't be treated as serfs or indentured servants. Boo, 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 boo.
Hey, you guys aren't playing with my stuff in there, are you?
No.
Hi, I'm Tony, and welcome back to Elgin 2030, where we continue our discussion of the hatchet job that Mayor Potter and the city manager are trying to perform on the Elgin Fire Department. But before we get into that, though, I'm sure some of you have seen the Spring Spirit newsletter sent out by the city, and I have a few comments on it. Now, personally, I think you can tell a lot about people from what they say, and this might seem like a no-brainer, but let's take the city manager's quote from the front page of the newsletter. Quote, ensuring that work is done in a cost-effective and expedient manner to make certain resident expectations are met is extremely important, unquote. Now, listen to that again, and I'll add a single word which changes the entire meaning. Ensuring that work is done in a cost-effective and expedient manner to make sure certain resident expectations are met. You don't even really need the word sure. You could just read it incorrectly to get the same idea. Now, I'm not a city manager. I didn't go to city manager school or send away for the certificate and decoder ring with a bunch of box tops or whatever is required to be a city manager. But I would think that how you choose your words is worth at least 80% of the job. You know, so the people you work for don't think you're a huge walking douche. Now, the other point that's extremely laughable is the way Mayor Potter talks about the unemployment problem in Elgin while using a contractor staffed with undocumented workers. A touchy subject, I know, and from a humanity perspective, it's so complicated that I'm not even sure what side I'm on. But it occurs to me that if you want to complain about unemployment, you might want to make sure you're employing people who pay taxes back into the system. Now, understanding these details about these two guys, it's not really a mystery why they would approach the fire department in such a reckless and capricious way, but that doesn't make it any less f***ing tragic. In this episode, we're going to focus on trying to figure out where the money is going, and it's a big subject, so if you have any questions when it's all said and done, just shoot me an email at tony@elgin2030.com. Now, looking at the budget online is like trying to see a completed puzzle while it's still in pieces on the table. And I found myself wondering how much of that confusion was intentional. But let's kick it off with a fantastic contradiction. This is a great example of the confusion being sent out by the mayor and the city manager concerning the fire department. On page 15 of the General Fund Financial Plan, city manager says that, quote, due to the weak economy and the complete slowdown in residential development, the construction of Fire Station 8 has been postponed indefinitely, unquote. Now, on page 6 of the Spirit newsletter, in the lower half of the page, is an article titled, Elgin Leads the Area in New Housing Starts, which says that by the end of this year, just about 250 new homes will have been constructed. 250 homes. That's conceivably 1,000 new citizens in a city that doesn't have enough fire personnel now to make it to some locations in a reasonable amount of time. Now, just a quick review. A fire engine puts water on a fire, and a fire truck has the tools and equipment to fight fires. We have 2 trucks in Elgin, which is funny in and of itself, since the city decided that we needed the second truck in 1969 when our population was just 55,000. Now, in 2010, we've doubled that. And I'm not qualified to say that our geographic area requires more than 2 trucks, but I've talked to experts in the field that state very clearly that manning both trucks as jump companies is begging for disaster. And I know I've talked about jump companies last episode, but it bears repeating. If you have a crew of guys on an ambulance who have a particularly bad day and spend maybe 10 hours transporting patients and medical emergencies, and then a fire happens at 2 a.m., do you think you get a crew of fresh guys in the truck? No. You get those guys that have worked for 10 hours and are operating in an emergency on maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep. Now put yourself in that situation. Your house and everything you've worked for is burning to the ground, and ask yourself who you want to see when that truck comes. This isn't rocket science, but somehow the mayor and the city manager can take even this simple idea and confuse the citizens. Now, for example, in the 2010 budget in the Fire Services document, under the ridiculous heading of Community/Strategic Goal Number 8, Financially Stable City Government, City Manager talks about applying national standards like those standards set by the National Fire Protection Association. But in reality, the city is ignoring every standard and applying the same logic model they apply to staffing. Because just as they would rather run the guys through hours and hours of overtime to save the costs of salary and benefits, the city would rather gamble with our safety and just pay legal fines and settlements as they come up because of substandard fire management. Now, the standards they keep referring to in this budget are quite clear, but what's even more clear is that the city manager and the mayor keep pushing our fire department further and further away from the standards that they themselves pretend to respect. Now, on the last page of that Fire Services document, for example, they list a standard response time from alarm to arrival on scene of just about 6 minutes. And the chart they include says that we have an average response time of about 8 minutes. But what would you say if I told you that I know for a fact there are times it takes one of our trucks 11 or more minutes to get to the scene because we don't staff a full-time truck? What if I told you that if you were to look at a coverage map of the city's 2 trucks, that there is no truck coverage west of Randall Road and south of Route 20? See, these are things the city manager and the mayor don't want you to know or think about, because then you might start demanding a change. They will complain about overtime and the cost of fire protection for hours if you let them, but they are strangely silent when it comes to the $3 million they plan to spend this year on golf operations. But this brings me back to the city manager's quote on the front of that newsletter, making sure certain resident expectations are met. Now, I'm sure everyone would rather go play a round of golf than go to Foxfire Fest or keep your home from burning down. Douche. The fun fact for this episode is that the city paid for their golf operations how? Well, on the back of the fire department, of course, by cutting $1.3 million from the department budget, appropriating the $1.4 million in expected ambulance charges, and $100,000 from the Foreign Fire Insurance Board, and cutting the maximum duty personnel from 36 to 34. But to add insult to injury, in the variance the city forced the fire department to sign in February is this happy little passage, quote, Local 439 agrees that for the duration of this variance agreement, it waives any and all rights it may have to bargain over and or contest, and agrees it shall not request to bargain over and or contest in any manner or forum the reductions in minimum manning from 36 to 34 and or the methodology for implementing such reduction in minimum manning as determined by the city, unquote. Now, what does all that mean? It means the fire department isn't allowed to talk about how the reduction in staffing will affect the safety of the city. Now, if that doesn't piss you off or clue you in to where safety hits on the mayor's list of priorities, then it's time to wake up and take notice, because you're part of the problem. Mayor Potter and city manager depend on your ignorance of how the fire department works to hatch their insane little golfing agenda. But remember, from city manager's viewpoint, the important thing is to look forward to 2030 and shut up about what's going on now. If that wasn't the case, he wouldn't have had to include something like that in a variance. Now, on our next episode, we'll be getting into specifics on what's been stripped out of the fire department and how we can expect that to affect our lives and safety. We'll see you next time, Elgin.